If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. And of course, be sure to give the video a like as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. And now, the Sunday address. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa showed up at the White House, and he did it knowing full well that Trump was going to be making all kinds of outrageous accusations about white genocide. And then Trump pulled out some video and some stills that was supposed to be his Trump card, pun intended, where he was claiming that there were all of these white people who had been killed. But even the white media didn't need very long to understand that Trump's phony claims and his so-called material, all of his evidence, was complete and thorough crap.
Death.
U.S. President Donald Trump made several false statements and misrepresented some facts during a contentious Oval Office meeting on Wednesday with South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. Here's a look at some of the claims made by Trump about the alleged persecution of South Africa's white minority. Number 1. There is a genocide of white farmers in South Africa.
Persecution or genocide going on.
This conspiracy theory has been propagated by some fringe groups of white South Africans since the end of apartheid in 1994. It's been circulating in global far-right chat rooms for at least a decade. Trump held up a sheet of paper with a picture of people lifting body bags.
These are all white farmers that are being buried.
The image actually shows humanitarian workers burying bodies in the city of Goma in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's a screen grab of this Reuters video taken in February following deadly battles against Rwanda-backed M23 rebels who had captured the city.
That's what you get when you decide to get your information from internet comment sections and Reddit forums. Of course, this blew up in Trump's face in short order. Elon Musk's team can't read, much less do any basic research. But that wasn't the point. I would not at all be surprised if this is another one of Steve Bannon's so-called strategies to just say any stupid thing that will get the media to take their eyes off the ball so the Republicans can be doing some dirt behind the scenes. It wouldn't surprise me at all if that's what was actually going on here, but Trump didn't really have much to worry about in terms of the white media deciding to have a feeding frenzy at his expense on this, mainly because of the fact that, as we've seen, most of the white media decided to focus more on budget squabbles than what you would think would be a golden opportunity to show everybody just how dumb and incompetent Trump and that clown car of crazies he has as his administration are. But that was never going to be the case, mainly because Ramaphosa himself was not there to do any sort of battle. What was he there for? Well, I'll tell you in a moment, but you can probably already guess. Oh, and by the way, Trump decided to also show some video of Julius Malema talking tough, and while I do appreciate what Malema tries to say, the reality is I don't seriously believe that it would ever go beyond words. But regardless, Ramaphosa could have easily fired back at Trump, pointing out that there's no need to be afraid that the good white folks in South Africa are going to have land taken from them. The U.S. needs to be concerned about the land that the Israelis are taking from the Palestinians. That's where real genocide's taking place, and that's where people are actually having their land taken from them, not simply at the barrel of a gun, but using 2,000-pound bombs. And those bombs, as well as the money that's being used to fund the IDF's death machine over there, is being supplied almost exclusively by the United States. And before anyone forgets, keep in mind, it was South Africa who were the ones who brought the case before the International Court of Justice, accusing Israel of genocide. And wasn't it Ramaphosa who was South Africa's president when this occurred? There were all kinds of bold accusations being made at that point, although nobody pointed out the U.S.'s complicity and support for everything that the Israelis have been doing. One would have thought that as long as Trump was going to tell lies about South Africa, the easiest refutation would be for the South Africans to tell the truth about Trump and the United States. If ever there was a perfect time and place to threaten to force AFRICOM out of Africa, to declare that Africa is going to seek closer ties with Russia and China, and to threaten to stop all rare earth mineral sales to the U.S., it was then. But of course, no African country has ever or would ever do that. They literally can't afford to. The problem wasn't that Ramaphosa forgot about all these things or that it slipped his mind. You saw he was sitting there goofy grinning. The problem was that he was only too glad that Trump invited him to the White House, because he didn't come there to stand up for South Africa or anything else. The white media tried to prop this guy up some while back, claiming that he had mentioned the Black Lives Matter movement back in 2020. But the reality is, when he gave this UN statement, over the internet, by the way, he gave a very circuitous mention to Black Lives Matter, very oblique. He didn't even say Black Lives Matter. He just basically talked in very general terms about racism. And he didn't even have the decency to say the word black through this alleged statement. So there was no mention of Black Lives Matters. There was no mention of black anything. Ramaphosa has long been trying to make sure that he stays on the right side of certain people from Europe that he's desperately trying to keep the approval of. That's what he's really about. And that's the reason why, when Trump was giving him a tongue lashing, he didn't even mention the treatment of Black Americans during this meeting with Trump. Didn't say a word about Black Americans at all. Out of sight, out of mind. Say what you want about Volodymyr Zelensky, but at least when he came to the White House, he pushed back. But, of course, Zelensky was there to stand up for his people. He was there to advocate for his people. Ramaphosa was there for a self-serving photo op. And that brings us to the crux of another problem. See, Trump didn't just invite Ramaphosa there spontaneously, any more than he did Zelensky. Trump invited both of those guys to the White House for the same reason. And they both showed up for the same reason, even though they knew exactly what was going to happen. Because both Ukraine and South Africa want money from the Trump administration. He knows that. So they can't really afford to wag their finger at his faces. They definitely can't afford to try to rattle their sabers at him because, truth be told, they don't really have sabers. They basically don't even have pocket knives at this point. No matter how blatant the lies Trump told, Ramaphosa was still going to sit there smiling and grinning like an idiot and just take it because he wants money from Trump. He needs money from the U.S. And for a cowardly failure like Ramaphosa, it's far easier to beg than it is to build. It's far easier to get slapped in the face than it is to stand on your own 2 feet. Problem is, a man who tries to get money on his knees usually winds up flat on his back. People keep asking the same silly question about this interaction, this so-called confrontation, which wasn't a confrontation at all. It was just Trump sitting there making all these accusations and Ramaphosa trying to grin through all of it. People keep asking, who do you think lost that argument? Well, that's the wrong question to ask, because Trump had little to lose. People say that, well, Ramaphosa looked more presidential. Since when has the orange man ever cared about that? He's never tried to be a statesman. 1, he's incapable of that, and 2, he knows that the entitled bigots that he wants to appeal to, they consider those kind of dignified, staid, respectable public figures to be weak. Trump comes off as a loud, intentionally offensive, combative punk that he is because these bigots want to look at him and see themselves. He knows that, so that's how he presents himself. Which is why he's repeating every phony thing that he's ever seen or heard on Reddit. Oh, but what about his credibility, some have asked. Seriously? You actually think he cares about credibility? He already knows he doesn't have any to begin with. He's a con man. He knows it, so do his supporters. Credibility. You can't lose what you never had. And that's the reason why, even with this clown show having blown up in Trump's face, he doesn't have to worry about losing credibility. And let's be honest, do you see Ramaphosa or any other African leaders attempting to humiliate Trump over this? Do you see any of those African leaders making him pay for this mistake? Do you see any of them saying, you know what, we're going to be putting our heads together and finding ways to make the U.S. pay for this. You can't disrespect us like this. You can't disrespect an African leader like this. None of them saying that. Trump has put all kinds of travel restrictions on African countries, including South Africa, but you wouldn't know about how Ramaphosa acted. How much of a stink did he raise about that? Did he say, you know what, we're putting restrictions on American travelers? Of course he didn't do that. He could have challenged Trump, or don't bother to show up, because he was the summoned in this case. That meant that Trump had the upper hand. It was up to him to decide to turn the tables, but I'm sure we'll have the usual suspects try to tell us that Ramaphosa was playing some sort of three-dimensional chess. That's usually the go-to line of BS that gets pulled out times like this. The reality is Ramaphosa's as much a castrated puppet of white power as Mandela ever was. That's the entire reason that he was there. That's why he's the so-called leader of South Africa. Because if he had any steel in his spine, he wouldn't be the leader of South Africa. They would have had somebody else up in there. And that's the reason why I can't stand the fact that we get all these tethers and foreign flags who come in here all the time talking about how independent they and their home countries allegedly are. But Ramaphosa showed us the reality. He's a head of state, allegedly. But look what happened. Trump brought him in and scolded him like a child. And he just sat there and had to take it. Africa has been completely undone from within. It's overrun with people who flee, backstab, and refuse to get on code. Tragically, that's become the culture there. But you couldn't tell by the people who we constantly see claiming to be batting 1,000. Meanwhile, the most popular word in Nigeria is Japa. When an entire group of people don't have any fight in them, it's obvious. Tough talk doesn't fool anyone for very long, especially when the person spouting that tough talk never puts any tough action behind it. Cowardice that was on display from Ramaphosa last week is precisely why the U.S. was so eager to bring in so many tethers and fleers. They want the same timidity and cowardice towards white supremacy that is the norm in Africa. And while it is true that we have plenty of brothers and sisters from abroad who've got some steel in their spines, the reality is they are still the minority. That's the entire problem. There's simply not enough of them. Ramaphosa's job last week was to present African leaders to the U.S. as being a bunch of paper tigers, or should I say paper lions, and that's exactly what he did. Half of the people over there still consider themselves to be subjects of Britain or whoever their former European colonial masters were. That's why they're so shocked and appalled when the Europeans reject them and do so violently. And that's also why they can't wait to buck dance for some butter biscuits on the off chance that they do manage to sneak into this or that European country with some sort of asylum claim. And this pandering, sniveling, and cowardice in the face of white supremacist aggression, this complete lack of spine, the unwillingness to act like a leader, and the refusal to do for self, this is the real Mandela Effect. See, the U.S. was instrumental in making sure that Mandela was put in prison back in the day, and the U.S. designated Mandela as a terrorist all the way up until 2008. That's 20 years after the man was released from prison. So when you had Bill Clinton in the White House during the 90s, as far as he was concerned, Mandela's still an enemy of the U.S. And yet you had Mandela with his goofy self. Soon as he got out of prison, he said he wanted to go to Disneyland. I guess no one ever told him what Walt Disney thought of black people. And no one told him that the only reason apartheid fell was because black Americans were attacking the white Dutch occupation regime's primary form of support, the U.S. government. And all of these companies and corporations over here, they were the ones who had pressure put on them by foundational black Americans who were telling everybody you're going to have to divest. You have never seen these immigrants doing that in the U.S., by the way. Not even for the countries they come from. Soon as they flee, they never advocate for their people. Except for some phony chest-beating routine whenever they win an Olympic medal or they get in a Hollywood movie, and suddenly they're so proud to be Nigerian or Jamaican or Ghanaian or Kenyan or whatever. This is why millions of immigrants from the Caribbean and Africa have never and will never translate into political clout for these countries in the U.S. or anywhere else. Now, people may think that that's harsh for me to say, but that's the reality. You saw what Ramaphosa did. See how much clout he had? After all the lies Trump told about South Africa, and knowing that Trump was going to be doing nothing but lying to him and setting him up for some half-brained ambush, you had Ramaphosa who was still shaking hands with this guy, smiling and yucking it up as if everything was everything. But then again, Nelson Mandela had no problem happily shaking hands with George H.W. Bush in 1990, even though Bush was the chump who ran the infamous Willie Horton ad just 2 years earlier. Guess nobody told Mandela about that either. And this is why Dr. Joseph Ben-Jochannan said that if you're with Mandela, then you're not with him. These are the people who the white media tries to tell you and me are the revolutionary leaders in Africa, when nothing could be further from the truth. White power believes in controlling both sides of the argument, thank you, Newly Fuller. First of all, white power knows when a Negro is easy to break, and it uses prison to break weak Negroes. A lot of them went in trying to put up a front, but they came out buck-broken and looking like whipped dogs and acting like cowards. I don't know how much spine Mandela had when he was illegally put in prison, but we do know he didn't have any spine left when he came out. If he did, then they would have killed him while he was in there. Look what Putin did to his rival, Alexei Navalny. You can tell when the power structure considers somebody to be a threat. Stokely Carmichael, a.k.a. Kwame Ture, said that all the scared Negroes are dead. Well, in the U.S. that's true, but outside the U.S. in places like the Caribbean and in Africa, the opposite is true. All the brave Negroes are dead. All they got left are tethers, cowards, and phonies trying to fake it till they make it. That's how you get someone like Cyril Ramaphosa coming to the U.S., hat in hand, head bowed down, making sure not to speak above a whisper, knowing that he's going to get a tongue lashing and just meekly taking it without a peep of real pushback, and then making nice with the man who did it to him afterwards. I suppose when you've become accustomed to living life on your knees, you get used to it. This is not what you have to do, this is just what you do. And that's the real insult that came out of last week's meeting with Trump. Not the way that Trump was acting, everybody knew that was going to happen. But what was also sadly predictable was that Ramaphosa would simply be yet another African leader, quote unquote, who was going to sit there, head down like a child being scolded, He wasn't going to stand up for Black Americans, the only ones who made it possible for South Africa to free itself. He didn't even bother to stand up for South Africans, and he wouldn't even bother to stand up for himself. Dr. John Henrik Clarke gave many lectures about the history of South Africa, especially the Zulu-Anglo Wars, and one of the things that he pointed out was that in South Africa, that country produces either whole men or whole cowards. And with Ramaphosa, it's easy to tell which is which. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Frederica Moore, Andre Evans, Devin Goodwin, Onan X, and Black Truth United. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.